Pranakasha livestream.
Hey folks, this is Matt from Pranakasha Productions, otherwise known as the Star Trek cello guy, the lead singer of the Macadamians party band, and also now the Venice Beach violin guy. And today we're talking with Jeanne D'Arcy, a Pacific Northwest author, blogger, etc.
Hi, folks. Yeah, that's my pseudonym that I use, and the one people know me more for my fan fiction is Pluralsword. You may have seen some of my stuff on AO3, or you may have seen me talking on Blue Sky, among other websites. Um, I really, really deeply love Transformers in terms of how much capacity there is to explore science fiction and issues of autonomy and transformation and existential themes of hope and non-dualistic approaches to problems. And that's something that I think some of the best of Transformers storytelling has in common with other great sci-fi works like Ancillary Justice, Babylon 5, um, some of my favorite parts of Star Trek.
Of course,
That's
Star Trek.
into more.
Very cool. Well, I know Transformers kind of showed up in the American scene. When would you say is when it really hit?
It hit in '84. The comic and the show was something that people had an interest in, but it didn't really, I think, start to get really big until the second season, is my understanding. Now, I could be wrong about this because my memory is a little fuzzy on what I've read from that time period, but that's my
Interesting.
thing. It was kind of concurrent with GoBots. GoBots was running in '85, and GoBots would actually go on to influence Transformers quite a bit for the years that would come after.
Very cool. Yeah, I remember I was actually when I was a kid, I spent about a month in Japan, and that was like in the mid 70s. It was 1974. And already in Japan there was a lot of kids would play with a lot of things that looked like Transformers and stuff like that.
That's
So
that reason for that. So Takara had this line called Diaclone, which was the pre-Transformer toys, but they looked a lot like the Generation 1 Transformers. And so they teamed up with Hasbro to have those be sold in the US as Transformers, and then they eventually changed it to Transformers in Japan as well. That's kind of what happened. They actually they had this whole fake out magazine of saying we're going to do a Diaclone movie, and then at the end it was like this is actually going to be Transformers. So keep an eye out for the Transformers.
that's good. Yeah, that's marketing for you. Well,
Yeah.
that's a little bit like you probably know the story behind Godzilla too is the
Yeah.
original Godzilla movie was totally done in Japan, and then they brought it over to the US and then added some scenes with well-known US actor. I forgot what his name was, darn it.
I actually
And
don't know
then marketed it in the US.
that. Hmm.
So, but they just added those scenes for just the point of having some kind of star power with from a well-known US actor. That interesting how that works. And then of course then Godzilla became a huge hit over here.
Yeah, I mean, Leonard Nimoy actually voiced for the original Transformers 1986 movie.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. See, this is the part where I said my memory is a little fuzzy on some things on the television. I don't remember if it was Unicron or oh yeah, it was Unicron that he voiced, I think. I think that's what he did.
Wow.
Uh, yeah,
That's cool. I did not know that. Leonard Nimoy, obviously, as the original Mr. Spock.
yeah.
I shouldn't have to say that. We are assuming everybody watching this is a Trekkie, but I don't know if that's a good assumption or not. Um, yeah, well, that's very cool. Then of course the Transformer movies um have become a big hit since then.
Yeah.
And you were telling me like there was a lot of you kind of went with the whole Transformer idea
Mhm.
and went farther with it, like how people transform their identities and their
It's
lives and their personalities and so on.
something that they were doing in the comics and also in some of the pro stories. So basically, how do I put this? Both Transformers and GoBots and other transforming alien robot stories both have a lot of accidental and sometimes, in the case of Transformers, intentional overlaps with how does gender work. Because I come at gender from a perspective of gender assemblage, which is to say, it's all building blocks. It's not rigid ontologies of or ideas of okay, this is strictly what is female, what is male, and so on. Or instead, it's more like the different things about how one wants to look and be and what they want to do that you kind of assemble and like for me, yes, I'm a trans woman, but I'm also butch. There is an aspect of, I mean, that's an approximation of term, but that's was good enough for this conversation. Where I feel there is something I like about having uh muscularity, having body hair, and so forth. But and frankly, I feel like I wish, in daily life, I wish I could wear plate armor and a skirt at the same time, and but that's not quite accepted in civilian society in the 21st century basis. That I'm
Now
sad.
hold on there. Well, you could wear. I've seen plenty of people that are wearing like chainmail, and of course, like if you went to some LARPing thing, of course you can do whatever.
Yeah, in LARPing you can
You
do
know,
whatever. It's part of the fun of going to, like, say, a Transformers convention. It's a very, very open-minded space, in my experience.
right?
But and what was I gonna say is that Transformers has had, you already have a base principle of someone who has two very different bodies usually,
Okay.
and that can change between. So you've already got that, and then you've got the way the shapes kind of have some non-human aspects to them because of what the vehicle or animal mode or what have you. And then you get to the gender part, which is some of the stories, including the early treatments of Transformers before the season one and the Marvel comic release, wanted to have women Transformers in those stories. They got shut down at that point in time. Unlike GoBots, where GoBots from the get go had women GoBots, and but Transformers later did this in the 1986 movie because Ron Friedman, who unfortunately passed away this year, he really pushed to have RC be in the movie as a main character who can fight and speaks her own mind because his daughter was into Transformers and he wanted to um, make sure that there was some sort of representation that wasn't just a bunch of guys. I'm sorry, it's a little emotional for me because I actually got to meet him in 23.
Too.
Oh,
I,
cool.
yeah, he his he wrote a book about the what the impact the film had on the fandom. But we can get to that later. We're talking about gender. Some of the writers didn't quite know what to do with robots and gender because aliens and robots. There's an assumption that a lot of humans have, unfortunately, in the past that robotic nature isn't do gender the same way because it's not organic. But that doesn't quite add up to me because a sapient entity that can contextualize from the world and from themselves and create and try to figure themselves out. You can have an equivalent of gender even if it's not the same words.
Hmm.
So other stories later, especially in the 2012 2018 period, would explore how gender works for Transformers. In that time period, you had stories coming from pro stuff from 3H talking about some various prominent female characters for those stories, but also actually trying to handle talking about trans stuff in regards to Transformers, like trying to figure out how they basically it was a short story about them having a sort of transformation from by observing other life forms, navigating that stuff and uh changing things up for themselves. Some people would change their shape, and some people just change their pronouns. Howlback is an example of a character who, because she was in a previous comic by David Willis, was used she, her, and didn't change her shape. For context, she's a cassette who turns into a cat, and also sometimes in other things a plane. Does not have a human form. But then you had
An actual cassette tape or the player, the cassette player?
tape,
The tape. Oh, interesting.
and but then you had some bipedal uh, characters like Arcee, who's transfemme, and Arcadis, who's transmasc, and then there are some instances of trying to
Now,
remember.
what occurs to me is that I mean this idea of transforming from one form to another. I mean that's a common sci-fi trope because you got like the Incredible Hulk.
There is an
Uh,
identity built in, like all the way back in G1, Lightspeed, and this is way before getting in more into depth about dysphoria and euphoria and issues of community. Lightspeed as a transformer, he's framed as a guy who he turns into a car, but he has always wanted to fly into space. He's always
okay,
wanted. He's framed with that thing, and so then the reason I brought up RC a bit is because I now have to get into the accidental minefield. I wrote a whole essay about this. Uh,
oh,
so basically, in 2008, there was a writer who has now much improved in his writing about gender. I actually read his recent comic, Astrobots, which was an independent comic attached to a small toy line. That honestly, it actually had a very good discussion of misogyny and bioessentialism, and it felt like a love letter to RC, which is a big step to be taken considering how much tumultuousness there was over her character in 2008 to 2014. So
okay,
basically, she was introduced into a rather complex, kind of dark comic universe of the IW1 IW2005 storyline, which it does have a very hopeful and beautiful ending, but that's later. The thing is, she's introduced at a time when the Decepticons and Autobots are at a desperate point in their fight against each other, but she's coming at this from a whole other angle, calling for galactic uh, justice against like old enemies the Autobots think are dead. And she's also wants vengeance against one of those. And it turns out that the way the comic phrased it is that she um was experimented on to just to introduce gender to her species. And this is because, like I mentioned before, that sort of androcentric perspective on Transformers at that time. But that is something later writers would then reapproach as she had sought out a surgery, but by using also words that were in the text. I want to note some of this is in the text. The fact that she didn't know that her doctor is what we in the trans community would call a transmedicalist, i.e., someone who has rigid ideals about what how one should be shaped or behave as a man or woman, especially if one is trans. So she sought a surgery and didn't quite get what she wanted, and this kind of is reflected visually because in the late 2000s, her shape in the comics is rather lanky and thin. And by the time we hit 2018, she has a lot of bulk on her, but she's still very curvy. There's just this I don't. In that part, I don't know if it was intentional, but I can say that there was a consistency in some of the artists who were developing a design over the years. You'd have to ask them, but it's just something that texturally is very convenient, considering that she has a whole journey of healing and trying to find community in a world where she was alone because her planet, Cybertron, her homeworld, had forgotten about how gender worked and largely was assuming maleness was the norm. And so she manages to reconnect with some lost colonies that still retain knowledge of gender. And that's just something a lot of people brush this off as unrealistic, but here's the problem is that in real life, in real history, we have gone through cycles of burning or destroying knowledge about gender. You can look at it with Institute for the Study of Sexuality in Weimar, Berlin. That was burned by the Nazis. And then if you look at the fall of Sumeria, Sumeria had knowledge of at least 7 different genders. Some was spiritual and some were not. They had their own words for them. Their equivalent of the Gali was, I mean, their equivalent of transfemininity was the Gali. And then for the transmask was the Pili Pili. And these are things that get lost. Well, there are things that we don't know about indigenous societies that they used to have knowledge about or are trying to remake. And then it's not that far fetched to me when we're talking about the fact we're living in a world where most people do not understand that women have and will go to war and have very successfully in many occasions. I so there's something wrong. So I don't think it's far fetched at all for a knowledge loss like that to happen. I mean, you got the burning Library of Alexandria. Anyway, I'm on. What I'm trying to say is there's something very beautiful there about her connection. Like she meets this someone from the planet Canonus, Aileron, who her whole religion, the way of flame, is about the sacredness of the fact that all life is continuing to transform and that us living beings are trying to transform towards what our inner truth is. The specific term used is reforging. That comes up in one of the comics in that of TLR1, which Aileron is not in, but Aileron and Arcee interact in the comics by John Barber, which are Robots in Disguise, 2012, Transformers 2014, and Transformers Optimus Prime, and the series. This is then built on again in IDW 2019 when they actually explore kids growing up without quite having an alt mode yet. They haven't picked their shape, but they get to pick one. They get to figure out what they want to do and what and you know, considering Transformers being Transformers, Arcee's kid Gage, she unfortunately gets kidnapped and put in the equivalent of a conversion camp, but she manages to get out of it because Greenlight is messaging her. And I don't mean conversion camp in the classic anti-LGBTQ sense, but it feels very similar because it's a bunch of theocratic reactionaries who want to make people fit their cult or wipe them out. It's a bit. Arcee's partner is Greenlight, and that story is able to reach her, and the three of them figure out how to stop the cult. Anyway, that was a whole ramble.
Wow. But there's a lot there. There's a lot to unpack. So what I was trying to say is, in sci-fi, there's a lot of tropes, transformation type of tropes. Like there's the Incredible Hulk where he has 2 identities and he switches back and forth. And then of course there's like the werewolf trope and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. So like that, this idea of like a person having 2 totally separate identities that are almost like completely different from each other is we have that in classic sci-fi. And then Transformers took it and then turned it kind of into robots.
Yeah.
And then really went with it. I'd like to hear a lot about your fan fiction, like how you incorporated this into your stories.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right that classic sci-fi does that. I mean, the original sci-fi story of the modern era, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein's monster, is for good reason something that when I was in school, people would talk about vis-a-vis introducing people to trans theory. That's and yeah, Hulk has that and so on. But in regards to my stories,
Okay.
uh,
Well, okay, since you mentioned it, well, like if you were to explain trans theory to somebody that's never heard about it, like somebody from another planet, like how could you quickly explain that
well,
to a
basically,
person?
I would start with the gender building blocks explanation,
Okay.
uh, the different components, and that some people, whether as early as the age of 4 or much later in life, some people only figure it out when they're in their 90s, realize from the context that they've accumulated that they actually want to change what words they use for themselves, whether it's their name or the pronouns, or they want to change their shape, or they want to find a different path in life that gives them more euphoria, i.e., a sense of happiness and fulfillment in connection to, in the case of gender, a sense of self that is contextual with some of the other things I mentioned. And that's just or and there might be some inner journey about navigating what is, if there's fluidity, or if they don't really fit uh the gender spectrum, like age, people who are agender or gender void would say that they don't necessarily connect as much with other gender things. And then you got xenogender people like me who, and this connects to my writing, end up coming up with an entirely parallel assemblage system sometimes to try and describe how it is that we feel. So,
Right. Okay,
but
let me ask you this. So like it's all to me it almost sounds like going down that path. It's kind of like a person that you know how people identify with the clothes they wear, what their fashion choices are and stuff. And people go, I was just watching a show on I think it was Netflix just the other day. It was something like What the F or something like that, where the whole show is it's kind of like I don't know if you ever watched those shows where they would go and they would revamp people's houses and totally remodel a person's house. This
yeah,
show was like what you would do is you would take a person would come on the show and you'd have these two fashion designers would completely revamp their entire wardrobe
yeah,
and maybe even change their hair and stuff like that, and redo their identity through their clothes.
yeah.
So what I'm trying to say is, so what you're saying is it's, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's similar to that, except not only you do it with your clothes, but you do it with your actual body.
That's right.
Or like
Yeah,
getting a tattoo, for example. I mean, obviously me getting a tattoo, it has a lot less a commitment than if I wanted to change my gender or something like that,
yeah,
physically
yeah.
change it. But it's
That's
somewhere in the same ballpark, wouldn't you say?
yeah. It is. Yes, because it's the assemblage aspect of you know realizing you want to actuate something, to realize a different stuff in a way that you haven't been able to before, or that was always in there, you didn't have words for.
Right.
And
Of course, the thing is with the, if you're going to actually change your body, undergo like hormone therapy, or
yeah,
you're going to actually have an operation that physically changes your body, obviously there's a lot more commitment to it because it's a lot more permanent than just, you know, changing your hairdo or changing your clothes or
that,
getting a
that
tattoo or whatever, or changing your pronouns or your name or something like that, because all those things are reversible.
yeah. And I that's it's actually really cool to hear that from you, because it is a big commitment, because even though there are some aspects of HRT that can reverse, it takes time. Like for me, they told me when I first started HRT that most of the changes from estrogens I wouldn't fully see for 2 years.
Okay.
And then 4 or 5 years later, my legs are just shaped different. That's just what's happened.
Hmm.
I didn't know that part was going to happen at the time. And then, with testosterone, it can take less time, but there are also other long-term effects that don't necessarily come up within the initial cycle of changes, and it is a big commitment, because it affects your neurochemistry as well, in terms of how you experience things. This is something a lot of trans people talk about, is that when they take the hormone that they need, it just the world feels different. There's this lovely acuity to experiencing the world. You have more energy to do things. That is euphoria. And
Yeah.
not everybody who's trans has dysphoria, but a lot of us find euphoria when we do things that we need that we want.
So in your case, you started taking a lot of testosterone,
No,
or
no, I took estrogen.
okay, so you went the other direction. Okay.
No, I mean, see, the funny thing is, here's the funny part, is that when I eventually, if I do a bottom surgery that reduces my ability to produce testosterone, I will have to take both testosterone and estrogen. This
Right.
is something that can happen.
Because you need both. Yep.
Yeah,
Yep. That's okay. Well, it's interesting because, of course, I know this because
yeah,
since I'm older 50 now. Of course, my doctor wants me to take testosterone supplements, but I pretty much argue against it. But what I did learn in all this is uh that your body also what it does is there's processes where can it converts testosterone. Like even if I were to take testosterone supplements, then
yeah,
I'd have to take this other thing that would prevent my body from taking that testosterone and turning it back into estrogen. Like your
yeah,
body can transform it into either hormone,
yeah.
surprisingly. So
It's
it gets very interesting.
yeah, and then
No,
some other species have entirely different hormones that they run on.
right.
Uh, like some birds. It's really something. What was I gonna say? But yeah, no, that's I take a hormone blocker because at least from what I understand, I if I were to just take the estrogen by itself, I the what they the what I was initially told is that I at the time didn't have a transference rate that would make sense for me to only take E. But the hormone blocker, frankly, I have found helpful. I'm currently taking bicalutamide, which you can only take for several years because there are some concerns about how it overworks your liver, but it has no side effects, which I'm very happy for.
That's good.
And so I might have to move to trying to do finasteride again after that, which tends to not have side effects. And I was going to say that people haven't had side effects of Bika, but most people don't. And or I might have to just inject estrogen, or I'm trying to remember what some of the other options are that are on the table for me. There are some other hormone blockers that tend to be side effect free. I was one of the people who did not enjoy being on spironolactone, which actually helped me write about Arcee a bit. Not so much because I had anything against the people who prescribed it, but just because it was not a fun time and I didn't know at the time that there was another option. So
Yeah. Well, there's a lot to it, that's for sure.
yeah,
So,
I'm very thankful for the care I've gotten. People really have cared a lot. I'm very lucky not to have been treated the way some of the women were in real life by the some early programs in the 20th century after the people who fled the fall of the Institute of Sexuality, who then came here and set up some expectations that were honestly awful. Like they told women that they would have to cut off all the connections to the relations and friends or anyone who knew them before they transitioned, and that they would have to be stealth. They'd have to behave like they were straight, and when couldn't do sex work and so on. And if they was seen as passing and failing grade in the long term check-ins after the surgery, they would call the morality police on them. It was bad. It was
now,
real bad.
now when was this?
This was here, I have it in my essay here. Let me pull it up. So yeah, if you look up Pluralsword Neocities, I have an essay called Trans History and Retcons regarding IDW1 Arcee in a Spotlight. There is it was the University of Minnesota that was doing this. And I linked to an article about that. Well, I mean, I have a citation for it. Hang on. Let me go grab the citation. It was someone wrote an article on this in yeah, the in the Eminopedia, the M Bill and Fibs did an article on the transsexual research project, so you can I'll put that link in the art conversation we're having here, so you can look at this yourself. But yeah, no, it turns out that the accidental tripping into a very complex topic that even us in the trans community don't understand very well and don't like to talk about was something that allowed for Transformers to then explore a very unique perspective in science fiction, which is part of why I like writing about Arcee so much. But this connects to the fan fiction thing that you were asking. So if you want me to get into that, I can explain.
Yeah, let's get into the fan fiction.
All right.
All right.
So, um, in regards to some of the first projects that I did, I wanted to look at a hard sci-fi take. Initially, this is what I wanted to look at: a hard sci-fi take of how would an alien robot society evolve over time? What kind of things could they create if they had all these resources on their planet? Uh, and so I looked at what kind of economies they could form, but also I looked at what kind of assemblage model they might create. So I ended up looking at linguistics and grammar to try and figure this out. And I ended up, I am still using the human languages to communicate these concepts. I'm saving completely alien sounding words from my original fiction. But
Okay.
for my fan fiction, I use an infinite compound noun system that I called Sparction, as in of the spark, because Transformers have a sort of physical soul in a lot of current media and for the last few decades, and also in some of the early treatments before before the show and comic actually took off and did not have those things. That idea was kind of there. So Spartan is basically something where you take different words and put them together. Like I would describe, say, Optimus Prime as a torque wire, because torque as a term is, yeah, in vehicular stuff, refers to kind of momentum and bounciness of a vehicle, the pushback in physics, and so combining that with the why, the asking, that's just the crashing momentum of seeking out answers to things and pushing forth those things. That's something that I thought would fit for him, and also something I thought would work for Alita, Warren, who, for those who don't know, is often the second commander of the Autobots, and sometimes Optimus's partner in the actual canonical stuff. So it's just something I thought was funny that could work for both of them if you step away from the gender model for the sake of my own writing. I'm not saying it is this way. I'm just saying this was my interpretation.
Okay.
And then for Arcee, I would describe her as more of a zoomed in. That's very close to how I feel, with some torquiness. I mean, and I would also say she has that. But so like the zooming part is a sort of gracefulness, the momentum of going forth, a graceful rush in the senses. And this is very much drawing on my initial euphoria from HRT, even with the brain fog I was dealing with spironolactone. And then combining that with the dare, the intrepidness, the just the sort of savvy to uh want to explore things and to go through life as living it as hard as one can, as happily as one can. And that's something that I think is interesting to look at, how that word is kind of mode neutral. This is something you could also use for someone who's not just a high end car or what have you. It could also work for someone who's a telescope because of how they zoom in on things, or a microscope. But it could also apply to someone who turns into an owl because it's just how they feel. I
Hmm.
wanted to create a terminology system that's something they would play with, but it wouldn't necessarily have a functionist or rather bioessentialist imposition on who they are.
Okay,
Uh,
so when you have like this sort of transformer character that you can transform into, that's
yeah,
kind of um like in the New Age thing, people have like animals. Like
yeah,
for
yeah, yeah.
example, my spirit animal is a wolf.
Oh, cool.
So that's kind of like my alternate identity.
Yeah,
So that's to me that sounds a little similar to like
it
if
is
you
kind of like
create a
that.
character that
Yes,
you transform into.
yes, and that's right. And even in the canonical writing, there's a lot of stuff about how people connect with their alt mode. Like Lodestar, for example, she's one of the big titans. She's a massive diplomatic cruiser doing all sorts of Star Trek stuff, and when she could in the short-lived IDW 2019 comic, uh, she um she says that it made her dysphoric to have extra weapons added on to her to fight in the Civil War. That's not she doesn't use the word dysphoric, but she says it doesn't feel right to her to have all those guns on her.
Okay.
She'd rather be out exploring the stars with Lightbright, her city speaker, who's sort of this much a more typically transformer sized bot who can connect with the much larger brain of a Titan, and the kind of the personalities kind of merge and mix, and they can take actions together in more effectively in ways they would not be able to apart. And
Okay, and now we've got now that people are getting really into like virtual reality and stuff.
yeah,
I mean, of course, you have gamers that have a completely different digital identity and character
right.
they can take on in any virtual universe they want. So it's kind of the same deal, wouldn't you say?
It is kind of virtual identity and alt mode. That's actually very interesting to say that it's similar. I think I think there is something to that in that some people find ways to express themselves in video games that they can't in the material world. Like if they do not
Mhm.
have the capacity to be out in terms of gender or other aspects of their lives, like if the non-human community, furries, and so forth. There are ways that they find they can do that in video games they otherwise can't. Sometimes at various stages in their life. So, and also interestingly, some writers I've met do like to write Transformers as robots who have a digital aspect that they turn into. I've seen some amazing stories about that.
Right.
But so
Well,
yeah,
once
there's a
you go
lot of
digital, then I mean, then you shed all the limitations of being in the physical world. Now you're kind
right.
of basically in the world of thought, where you can create anything within that
Yeah,
digital environment.
right. The only trade-off being giving up the material aspect. Some people I think getting to experience both is what's so interesting about characters like Soundwave, or who's a telepath, or characters like Windblade and Lightbright, who are city speakers because they can connect with the virtual world and the material world and combine the effects of those in very interesting ways. And this also goes for other characters as well, like Barrows of the Matrix, like Optimus Prime, and also humans connecting with Transformers. Like there was this
Right.
time that Scarlet from GI Joe got to see the virtual world of Cybertron in the Transformers vs. GI Joe crossover by Thomas Scioli. It was amazing.
Right.
Anyway,
And also, I mean, okay, now we're going down this road. Also, everybody experiences that when we go to bed at night and we sleep and we dream and we
yeah,
live in our
dreaming.
dream reality.
Yeah,
So there's something, obviously, the human brain gets nourishment or healing or something out of being able to go escape into this completely other reality
yeah.
for a certain amount of time each day. Like we have to do that in order to stay mentally healthy.
I think yeah, there's a material need for and an aesthetic need for storytelling. There's a sapient need for that, for
Yeah.
art.
Yep.
And and the way we still don't fully understand how dreams work or why, but I find that like when I use like dialectical behavioral therapy techniques regarding reducing nightmares by thinking about what I want to dream about or how I would change the nightmare,
Like a
or even
lucid dream
my
type of technique and things like
yeah,
that.
those actually help me a lot. And or thinking about what I want to write the next day. That actually, if I do that in the 15 minutes before I sleep, this was something that my writing coach suggested to me. Uh, that if I that actually helps me write when I get up the next day. It's really nice. But regarding my writing, I did also navigate looking at how what kind of how the trans theory component of what I write can is connected to aspects of maintaining a sort of cosmopolitanist collectivist society that's not unlike the Federation, but kind of different, and facing issues of dealing with reactionary rise ups of movements that are seeking a more imperial engagement, like the Decepticons. That's a very short simplification because I wanted to get to the fan fiction I write that is in regards to IDW1, where I explore a lot of things that are textual in the comic, but are not discussed in full in the comic because
Okay.
either they weren't going to be, or there wasn't a chance to. So like, here's a crazy thing. Well, not a crazy thing. One of the things that I think is undernoted about Arcee's journey canonically in gender wise in Transformers in IW1 is that she starts as some sort of treaded vehicle or tank bot, like her twin brother Galvatron, which for some of you who are not familiar with Transformers are going to be sitting, but know who those two are going to be like, what do you mean they're twins? They were both ancient warriors in that story. But she then becomes a hover car and later gains wheels and is kind of like a Lotus Elise. That's the design that Andrew Griffith based her off of for her Earth mode, which is also when she's at her happiest point in her life, because of various other things that were going on concurrently. But what I looked at is I tried to give an answer that the comics could not at the time. I mean, they got it. They found out in 2016 that they were going to be canceled in 2018. I tried to look at why would gender disappear in Cybertron, and the answer that I ended up digging because of my own studies. I studied philosophy and political science and international affairs among many and the arts among many other things when I was in undergrad and grad school. Was that the ruler who was around when the space bridge network to the colonies was lost, when that who's kind of set up the collapse of society into totalitarian stuff under the functionist council and the corrupt Senate after he left, who inspired functionism, Nova Prime. To me, the answer that I found was that the functionist movement didn't begin with an attack on stratifying society by alt mode, but instead by erasing gender, and from that basis, stratifying people by alt mode because of presenting a system of that's rigidly bioessentialist to categorize people by, and that the alt mode bioessentialism thing is canonical to IW1, but it's not. It's not how I would have written it, and I understand why it came out the way that it did, but I would have positioned the hierarchy differently. And B, it's not contextualizing the erasure of gender kind of thing, but it's convenient. It makes sense because uh what is a reactionary society going to do with if you have a species that's so fundamentally, blatantly capable of changing? If you let them know they can change so many things, including changing your alt mode, which canonically is illegal in the functionist regime. So that's something that someone like Arcee would not have been able to do had she done that later without getting trouble from the law. She did it before that law happened. But my point is, I looked at how a resistance movement could have formed, and I tried to fill in a lot of the years of her life that weren't covered, but staying true to the spirit of the really beautiful comics that were written for her, and looking at some post canon stuff because I wanted to look at how she could have resolved happiness with her family that she ended up having. She loses a lot of people in those comics, and but she also it's also the first comic where she really gets to laugh, just like a humongous laugh that I wish she got to do more often. But sorry, I'm rambling.
So let's tie it back. So let's tie it back into your fan fiction,
Yeah,
and let's see where we can go with it.
basically the novel that I've almost finished writing, Addendum.
Okay.
Like as I mentioned, it does cover her life in the portions that weren't covered by the comic. The I introduced the story with the collapse of the last parts of the old system that had been present under the 13 primes in their alliance that did acknowledge gender and supported it, and that she is having to take a stand when because she's just fed up with how her life has been a little difficult in terms of uh, economics, and also seeing that people are burning books and destroying libraries. She ends up getting involved with a resistance movement against the autocratic regime that is supporting all that. And that's also when she starts to finally admit to herself that she um, is trans feminine, wants to change her shape and all that. So I look at how I basically reframe the golden age as a period that was not just simply equality disguising imperial machinations, but instead was only really kept equal by people pushing back against said cloaked imperial machinations, and then the exodus that happened after that. But she wasn't present during the beginning of the Great War, at least that we know of. So I covered what she was doing uh, out in the stars, what family she lost, and so forth. I kind of really try to wrangle the kind of loneliness that she was dealing with, and also her determination to keep on and try to heal and connect to other people, and the intense struggle she has with the fact she's so good at fighting, but she doesn't want war to continue, and she would like to retire and she would like to teach, and I also dive more into how uh the fictional framework of the oppressions was going on, and then I skip ahead a bit through different parts of the timeline to touch on conversations I wish we had gotten to see. Like I wish we had gotten to know I know why they didn't cover it, but that's neither here nor there. What was it she and Windblade talked about when they first met? I would have liked to have seen more about the kind of sheer loss of the genocidal scale of loss that Aileron is grappling with the destruction of her planet and various other colonies, and even though some of her people survived, just the fact that the home she grew up in is gone. And I weave that all into that transfeminine context that uh of all the years of both wonderful experiences but also hardship that Arcee has been through, and that the people around her in her life towards the end of the story, like some of the people at the beginning, do understand. And I also I think I'm rambling a little bit because I'm a little sleepy. I apologize.
Well,
But
we're gonna wrap it up soon, so we'll be able to tie it all together and make it all make
yeah,
sense. Yeah.
yeah. But if I can just pull up the summary here, because that
Okay.
I wrote when I was more lucid might do me more service than than I did than I'm doing myself right now. The summary I wrote here was that 7 million years ago, the latest blow to gender on Cybertron is dealt by the rising functionist tide, stirring an Arcee struggling with loneliness and aesthetic dysphoria into enraged action to help the bots in the Hadean system across the aesthetic spectrum save their transformative glory and stories. In the process, she finds aid from the scientist J-Axis, who offers a new reformatting surgery to let her spark do shaping with CNA editing help. Thus begins a new chapter in her life as a founding member of the expansion of what would later be called the Anti-Vocation League. That's a canonical thing, by the way. The
Anti-vocational league. Okay.
Anti-Vocation League alongside what did you say?
The anti-vocational league.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
The Anti-Vocation League was something that James Roberts introduced in Lost Light, and I don't remember if it came up in MTMTE, but basically they were the anti-functionist movement. They were the ones that were an alternative to the Decepticons, and they appeared in the Lost Light because the Decepticons didn't appear in one of the universes. But the Arcee wasn't part of it, but Anna, someone she was close to in the comics, was in that alternate universe in the second in command. So I thought I'd bring it up alongside her beloved partner and fellow old person Kodaxa. Kodaxa wasn't actually in IW1, but she appeared in IW2. So I backported some people in, but
No, it's okay.
uh,
You're the
she's a
god of your
librarian.
universe, so you can all you have to do
Yeah,
the great thing about
yeah.
sci-fi is you can do all kinds of crazy stuff and explain it away in one or two sentences.
Right. Yeah, and I just thought they fit well together, and it's also fun because they both were parents in that later continuity. Codex is actually a Optimus Prime's mentor,
Okay.
so she's kind of his mom, but not. And I do have a rather via the matrix of leadership indirect way of tying that in one of the chapters of the story in chapter 30. But anyway, while grappling with her own growing pile of pains and traumas. As the millennia carry on and she has to space, they eventually meet Anna and Lug in the stars and some dear moments near the present, all the way through to events after Transformers Optimus Prime #25 post, where she helps some gender expansive bots. With some help from Aileron's pal, she finally gets some answers and closure to her own self and has a reckoning with forces pitted against her for millions of years. The years after are not what she expected during most of her life prior, and she is glad for them. This story, while it's um, it this one did not release at the same time as my original continuity fanfic thing that I mentioned earlier with the assemblage system. Day of Multiflame that came in 2022. This has been in the works since 2021. It's seen four, or in case in some chapters, seven drafts, and I've poured my soul into trying to tell a story that navigates so many issues of othering and existential hope because life for us trans people can be difficult. It can also be wonderful.
Hmm.
Us trans femmes especially have it hard. In the United States, our average wage, according to 2021 metrics that were collected, it was $600 a month.
That's
and that was
awfully
the lowest
low.
of the LGBTQ community. Yeah, it was bad.
That can get you like a quarter of a studio apartment in Seattle.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
then you have to worry about food
right.
and then your Netflix subscriptions and anything else you
It's,
want.
and there were times when I've seen people really struggle, and I mean I haven't always had it easy myself. I have been thankful for at least having support from my family and
Yeah.
friends, but I've gone unemployed for over 14 months. My point is, if a lot of people also helped me write this story. Like my writing coach looked at some of these chapters. And then my partner Jack, who also goes by the handle Megatronus II on AO3, i.e. Archive Our Own, which is where you can find that story that I just did a summary for, Addendum, um, has and many people in the fan fiction community have touched my story. Like I remember I went to TFCon Baltimore and I talked to two of my friends and I said, "Hey, look, I'm really struggling because I wrote I'm about to reach chapter 18, but it feels sad because there's all this, frankly, lesbian tragedy going on of losing family and friends because of a war that's tearing the galaxy apart, and she's still struggling to heal from her side effects. How do I continue with this, considering I'm also framing a breakup that's going to happen between her and Anna?" And they said, you can just skip the break. Some people who read the kind of stuff that you write, they're usually not looking for a long, lengthy downward spiral. That's usually a selling point of a story if it's about that, and that's not what your thing is. Because I do later have a lot more hope that comes up later, but it's yeah. Anyway,
Yeah.
that's I'm very thankful for all the people who have,
Supported you
yeah.
and continue to support you.
The Transformers community is really
Yeah,
special. Even when
that's
we
right.
argue, there's a lot of kind hearts.
Yeah.
You know, and yeah. I think also some of my writing, I can see how some of it was influenced by Voyager, which
Mm.
correct me if I'm wrong. There's a lot of that that reminds me of the Odyssey, and I've always been drawn to that story.
Yeah, with Homer, the Odyssey.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, I can see the parallels for sure.
yeah,
Yeah, that's great. Wow. Well, it's been a fun interview. I mean, really, it was quite an adventure.
yeah. It
And
was.
we just sort of scratched the surface of some of this stuff because I mean, it goes on and on. So,
It does.
and you have a lot of different works that we didn't even get to talk about. But what I can
That's
do,
right.
we can put links to all your stuff down in the description.
That'd be great.
Yeah, so people can click on it and they can and
Yeah.
go to all the stuff you're doing because you do a whole lot more stuff than we even mentioned.
Yeah, that's very true, and
Yeah,
I'm very glad that you looked at all that. It's really an honor
I
that
actually have a 3D printer. I have two of
you
them,
have
but
one.
one of them is still, believe it or not, one of them still in the box because my first
Um,
3D printer died. But then
yeah.
I figured, so I ordered the exact same thing on Amazon. But
Hmm.
then before it arrived, I figured out how to fix the first one.
Yeah.
So I never even unpacked the other one. It's still sitting. I'm like waiting for the first one to really die.
Yeah. Yeah.
Of course, now
Oh gosh.
it's there's way better printers out there that I could
I've
get.
been
Yeah,
meaning to
but
get into Lego Mars. People have told me that's a good one for
yeah,
cost effectiveness.
yeah.
I haven't done
Anyway, that's a whole other subject.
it.
So, well, it's been great. It's good just to be able to introduce you and to provide links so interested people can go click and
Yeah.
go off and really dig deep into your work and your life story and everything like that
Yeah.
and the whole community that you're part of. So
Thank you so much,
it has
Matt.
been a pleasure.
It
And since you did
has.
mention Star Trek Voyager, that means that you know what this is.
Yes, I do. I'm doing it on the other side of the
There we
screen.
go. May you live long and prosper.
Likewise, may you live long and prosper. Take care, Matt. We'll be in touch.
We shall.
Pranakasha production. Fantastic creations emerging spontaneously from the space of life.
For the benefit of all beings everywhere.
Needs more cello.